Desperation soon took hold as the village seers were consulted, their eyes rolling back as they sought visions and answers in the spirit realm. Yet even the seers, who had always been attuned to the unseen forces, could offer no explanation, no solution. The village was at a loss, and as the days turned into weeks, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. The river, the very soul of Ezenwa, was dying, and with it, the hopes and dreams of an entire community hung in the balance. Ugochugwu had always been the pride of his family. From a young age, his sharp intellect and insatiable curiosity set him apart from his peers. Teachers spoke of his brilliance with awe, and his parents, humble farmers, saw in him the promise of a brighter future. The village, too, placed its hopes in him, whispering that Ugochugwu was destined for greatness. It wasn't uncommon to hear elders say, "This one will be the light of our community." As Ugochugwu progressed through school, his star only shone brighter. He topped every class, won every award, and his name became synonymous with success. When he secured a place at the university, the entire village celebrated. They believed that his success would open doors for others, that his achievements would elevate them all. Ugochugwu himself was determined not to disappoint. He studied tirelessly, pushing himself to the limit, knowing that so many dreams rested on his shoulders. But in his final year, the unthinkable happened. Despite his unwavering dedication and countless hours spent in the library, Ugochugwu failed his crucial examinations. The news spread like wildfire, shocking everyone. The boy who had once been their beacon of hope had stumbled at the finish line. For Ugochugwu, the failure was more than just academic, it was a personal catastrophe. He had let down his parents, his village, and most painfully, himself. The atmosphere in the village changed. Those who once showered him with praise now spoke in hushed tones. Some blamed the pressure, others speculated about hidden distractions, but no one knew the true weight Ugochugwu carried. The constant whispers and sidelong glances felt like daggers. His once bright future now seemed shrouded in darkness, the path ahead uncertain and fraught with despair. But Ugochugwu was not one to surrender easily. After weeks of grappling with his failure, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. With no degree to his name and the dreams of a professional career shattered, he turned to a path he had never considered before, learning a trade. It was not an easy choice, but Ugochugwu knew he had to rebuild his life, even if it meant starting from the bottom. He found a skilled artisan in a nearby town who was willing to take him under his wing, teaching him the craft of furniture making. Though the transition was difficult, Ugochugwu approached his new endeavor with the same determination that had once made him a top student. Slowly but surely, he began to master the trade, creating pieces that reflected his meticulous nature and eye for detail. The village, though still disappointed, watched with quiet respect as Ugochugwu carved out a new path for himself. His journey was no longer about achieving greatness for others but about finding his own place in the world, one piece of wood at a time. Ugochugwu poured his heart into learning the trades, hoping that his persistence would finally pay off. He spent long hours in the workshop, crafting furniture with precision, only to find that his pieces were not selling. He then turned to blacksmithing, believing that the strength of metal would reflect the resilience he longed to feel within himself. But even there, his efforts crumbled, tools broke, orders were cancelled, and his work went unappreciated. Desperate to make something of his life, Ugochugwu tried his hand at farming, thinking that the earth, at least, would yield to his toil. But the rains were sparse, the crops failed, and he was left with nothing but barren fields and calloused hands. The village that once held him in such high regard now looked at him with a mixture of pity and disdain. The whispers grew louder, no longer hidden behind cupped hands. "Maybe he's cursed," some would say, while others shook their heads in disappointment. The bright young man who had once embodied all their hopes was now a shadow of his former self, weighed down by a string of failures that seemed endless. The dark cloud that hung over him blocked out every glimpse of sunlight, leaving him in a perpetual state of despair. In his darkest moments, Ugochugwu found solace in the only place that offered him some semblance of peace, the local palm wine bar. The small, dimly lit room became his refuge, a place where the sweet, potent brew could dull the sharp edges of his pain. Each cup of palm wine brought a fleeting sense of relief, a temporary escape from the reality that seemed too harsh to bear. Day after day, Ugochugwu would find his way to the bar, his steps heavy with the weight of his burdens. He would sit in the corner, away from the prying eyes of the villagers, and drink until the world around him blurred into a numbing haze. The bar became his world, a place where time lost its meaning and his failures no longer haunted him. But the solace he found there was fleeting, and as the effects of the alcohol wore off, the crushing weight of his reality would return with a vengeance. The more he drank, the more he needed to drink, and soon, the palm wine that had once been a temporary escape became a crutch he could not live without. The man who had once been the pride of the village was now a figure of sorrow, his life reduced to a cycle of drinking and despair, with no clear path forward. As Ugochugwu drowned in his misery, oblivious to the world outside the palm wine bar, a grave danger began to overshadow the village of Ezenwa. The village had always relied on a sacred river that flowed through its heart, a river revered not only for its life-sustaining waters but also for the spiritual protection it was believed to offer. Passed down through generations, the lore of the river spoke of ancient spirits who guarded it fiercely, ensuring that its waters remained pure and plentiful. For as long as anyone could remember, the river had been the village's lifeblood, nourishing their crops, quenching their thirst, and providing for their livestock. It was said that as long as the river flowed, Ezenwa would prosper. But now, for the first time in living memory, the river's flow had begun to dwindle. What started as a subtle change soon became alarming, as the once mighty river reduced to a mere trickle. The clear, bubbling waters turned murky and sluggish, barely filling the villagers' clay pots. Panic spread like wildfire through Ezenwa as the villagers realized the magnitude of the threat they faced. Without the river, their fertile lands would dry up, their crops would wither, and their livestock would die of thirst. The very essence of their existence was tied to the river, and its decline signaled a potential catastrophe. The village elders, custodians of tradition and wisdom, convened urgent meetings under the great Irako tree. Their faces, usually calm and composed, now bore the weight of deep concern. They knew that if the river dried up completely, Ezenwa would face not just hunger and thirst but the possible extinction of their way of life. The elders turned to the ancient rituals and sacrifices that had always appeased the spirits, hoping to coax the river back to its former glory. They offered the finest yams, slaughtered the healthiest goats, and poured out libations of palm wine at the riverbank, their chants echoing through the night. But despite their fervent prayers and the smoke of incense rising into the air, the spirits remained silent. The river continued to shrink, its once vibrant energy fading with each passing day. Fear began to creep into the hearts of the villagers, replacing the usual rhythm of daily life with a sense of impending doom. Mothers clutched their children tightly, men whispered anxiously in the marketplace, and even the birds seemed to sing a mournful tune. One fateful night, as Ugochugwu stumbled out of the palm wine bar, his vision blurred and his steps unsteady, he heard the low voices of the village elders gathered under the ancient iroko tree. Their tone was heavy with despair, their words laced with a sorrow that cut through even the fog of Ugochugwu's intoxicated mind. He paused, curiosity piqued, and leaned against a nearby wall to listen. The elders spoke of an ancient legend, one that had been passed down through generations but was seldom mentioned except in the direst of times. It was a prophecy, a tale of a savior who would come when the village faced its greatest peril. According to the legend, this savior would be an unlikely hero, someone who had endured great suffering and emerged stronger, someone whom no one would suspect of carrying such a burden. This savior, the prophecy foretold, would be the one to restore the river's flow and save Ezenwa from certain doom. As Ugochugwu listened, something within him stirred, a feeling long buried beneath the weight of his failures and the haze of alcohol. His heart, once so full of ambition and hope, now felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, yet deeply resonant. Was it the last remnants of his once brilliant mind, clawing their way to the surface? Or perhaps it was the spirits themselves, those ancient guardians of the river, whispering to him through the night. Whatever it was, Ugochugwu could not ignore it. He felt an inexplicable pull, a compulsion to act. With a careful mind, Ugochugwu listened to every bit of the elders' conversation and how to restore the fountain of the Ezenwa River. As he staggered past the elders, many of them hissed and some whispered among themselves that, could Ugochugwu be the restorer? If not, why should he be the one that should pass by while this kind crucial matter is discussed? Some elders exchanged glances, their faces a mix of skepticism and pity. How could this man, who had failed at everything he had tried and now spent his days drowning in drink, possibly be the savior spoken of in the prophecy? Yet, they were desperate. The river was dying, and with it, the village's hope for survival. They had tried everything else, rituals, sacrifices, consultations with seers, yet nothing had worked. Perhaps the prophecy was true, and perhaps, in some strange twist of fate, Ugochugwu was indeed the one destined to save them. The idea of Ugochugwu was discarded in no time and the meeting continued. Ugochugwu reached home that night but he could not sleep well. The Luke cure has cleared off his head and face with the thought of being the one to restore the Ezenwa flowing river. How can he get all the needed requirements mentioned by the seer in the meeting with the elders? As the elders were seeking for the rightful person though with no avail, Ugochugwu held straight to the seer's house. Getting to the seer's house, he explained his intentions to the seer and how ready he is to go but told the seer not to let anybody know about it, even the elders. After a long, heavy silence, the seer spoke. His voice was measured, carrying the weight of his years. Ugochugwu, he said slowly, the task you speak of is not one to be taken lightly. The spirits of the river are powerful, and their ways are not easily understood. But if you truly feel called to this quest, I will not stand in your way. Ugochugwu nodded, his mind now a swirl of determination and uncertainty. The seer, having no other option, gave him his blessing. He handed him a small pouch of sacred herbs, a talisman for protection, and the instructions to follow the river upstream until he reached the sacred grove, where it was said the spirits dwelled. As Ugochugwu left the seer's house, the seer watched him go with a mix of hope and doubt. The night was silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze, as Ugochugwu set out on his quest. Though his steps were still unsteady and his mind clouded with drink, something deep within him had awakened. Whether it was the prophecy, the spirits, or the last vestiges of his former self, Ugochugwu did not know. But he walked on, driven by a force he could neither understand nor resist, towards a destiny that awaited him in the darkness. Ugochugwu set out at dawn, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the mist as he left the familiar confines of Ezenwa behind. He carried nothing but a worn staff, the only weapon he could muster, and the tattered remains of his dignity. Each step was heavy with the weight of expectation, but also with a strange, new sense of purpose. This journey was unlike any he had undertaken before. No longer was he seeking academic glory or vocational success, but something deeper. Something that felt both impossible and inevitable. The path before him was unforgiving. As he ventured deeper into the wilderness, the landscape grew wild and treacherous. Thick forests stretched out in all directions, their ancient trees towering like sentinels over the land. The underbrush was dense and tangled, and every step was a struggle through thorny vines and hidden roots that seemed intent on tripping him. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the distant cries of unseen creatures sent shivers down his spine. Days turned into nights as Ugochugwu pressed on, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. Along the way, he faced trials that would have sent a lesser man running back to the safety of the village. He battled fierce beasts that lurked in the shadows, their eyes glowing menacingly in the dark. His staff, though simple, became an extension of his will, striking down foes with a strength he had forgotten he possessed. Torrential storms battered him, the winds howling like angry spirits as rain lashed his face and soaked his clothes. The mountains he had to cross were steep and unforgiving, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky like the teeth of a great beast. Yet Ugochugwu climbed them with dogged determination, his hands raw and bleeding from the effort. Each trial pushed him to his limits, testing not just his physical endurance, but the very core of his being. There were moments when he faltered, when the weight of his past failures threatened to crush him, when the thought of turning back seemed all too tempting. But each time, something within him urged him forward, a flicker of hope, a whisper of destiny, or perhaps the faint echo of the prophecy he now clung to with all his might. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of struggle, Ugochugwu reached the sacred source of the river. It was a place unlike any he had ever seen, a hidden oasis nestled deep within the heart of the wilderness. The air here was different, cool and crisp, filled with the gentle sound of flowing water and the soft rustle of leaves. The river's source was a crystal-clear pool, its waters shimmering with an otherworldly light. And there, rising from the center of the pool, was the guardian spirit of the river. The spirit was a being of pure majesty, its form both human and ethereal, composed of light and water that seemed to shift and flow with every breath it took. It stood tall and graceful, its eyes gleaming like the sun reflected on the surface of the river. As Ugochugwu approached, the spirit regarded him with a gaze that seemed to pierce through to his very soul, seeing not just the man he was now, but the boy he had once been, full of promise and potential. For a moment, Ugochugwu stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer presence of the spirit. But then, as if guided by an unseen hand, he fell to his knees, his heart swelling with humility and remorse. All the pride, all the arrogance that had once driven him had long since crumbled, leaving only a man who had faced failure, suffering, and loss, yet still found the strength to stand before this divine being. With a voice that trembled with emotion, Ugochugwu pleaded with the spirit. He spoke of his failures, his pain, and the suffering of his people. He begged for the river's mercy, for its life-giving waters to flow once more, not for his own sake, but for the village that depended on it, the village he had once let down so deeply. The spirit listened, its expression unreadable but its presence warm and encompassing. There was a silence that seemed to stretch on forever, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the rocks. And then, slowly, the spirit began to speak, its voice like the soft murmur of the river itself. "You have suffered greatly, Ugochugwu," the spirit said, "and you have faced trials that would have broken many. Yet you have endured. You have shown courage, not in the face of physical danger alone, but in confronting the darkness within yourself. The path you have walked has been difficult, but it has led you here, to this moment." The spirit extended a hand, its light bathing Ugochugwu in a warmth that seemed to seep into his very bones. The river's flow was not lost, Ugochugwu, it was withheld, waiting for the one who would prove worthy of its blessing. You are that one. You are the savior foretold by the prophecy. With those words, the spirit gestured towards the river's source, and before Ugochugwu's eyes, the waters began to stir. Slowly at first, and then with growing strength, the pool began to overflow, its clear, shimmering waters cascading over the rocks and down the mountainside. The river, once reduced to a trickle, now surged with renewed vigor, its flow strong and pure, rushing down to the village that so desperately needed it. Ugochugwu watched in awe as the river was restored, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a deep, abiding sense of redemption. The spirit, now a mere glimmer in the water, gave him a final, knowing look before it dissolved back into the river, its task complete. As Ugochugwu began his journey back to Ezenwa, the river's roar echoing in his ears, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. He was not the man he had once been, nor was he the man he had thought he would become. He was something different, something stronger, forged in the fires of his trials and tempered by the waters of the sacred river. And as he walked, the sun rising behind him, Ugochugwu knew that he had not only restored the river but had also reclaimed a part of himself that he thought was lost forever. It was a surprise to see the river flow being restored after 14 days from the last meeting of the elders and the rightful person yet unsecured. The elders summoned the seer to know the unknown. The seer told the elders that the gods of the river had provided the man he delighted in, and when he returns every person will see and know him. The elders started murmuring about the absence of Ugochugwu for some days, but no one was certain, and the seer did not reveal Ugochugwu's identity as agreed before he left. The seer only told the elders that prayer should be made to the gods concerning the safe return of the choosing one, since the evidence had shown. When Ugochugwu returned to Ezenwa, the sight that met him was nothing short of astonishing. The villagers, who had once averted their gazes when he walked by, now gathered in droves to witness his arrival. The news of the river's miraculous revival had spread like wildfire, and as Ugochugwu approached the village gates, the air buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Whispers of his bravery and the impossible feat he had accomplished swept through the crowd, transforming into shouts of joy and praise. The same people who had once pitied and scorned him now rushed forward, eager to greet him, their faces alight with gratitude and admiration. Children, who had been taught to avoid the man who spent his days in the palm wine bar, now looked up at him with wide, awestruck eyes. Men who had whispered of his failures in the market now clasped his hands in congratulations, their voices ringing with sincerity. Women who had once turned their backs on him now smiled warmly, some even weeping tears of relief as they thanked him for saving their homes and their families. Ugochugwu, who had once felt the weight of the village's expectations as a crushing burden, now stood before them, humbled by their outpouring of love and respect. The journey had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The trials he had faced had stripped away his pride and self-doubt, leaving behind a man who had learned the true meaning of perseverance, humility, and redemption. He no longer saw himself as the failure who had once brought shame upon his family but as a man who had been given a second chance, and who had risen to meet it. In the days that followed, the village elders gathered to discuss how best to honor Ugochugwu for his incredible deed. The revival of the river was a blessing beyond measure, and they knew that mere words of thanks would never suffice. After much deliberation, they decided to bestow upon him a reward that would secure his future and restore him to a place of honor within the community. On a bright, sunny morning, the entire village assembled in the central square, where a grand ceremony was held in Ugochugwu's honor. The square was adorned with vibrant fabrics and flowers, and the air was filled with the sound of drums and flutes, as the villagers danced and sang in celebration. The elders, dressed in their ceremonial robes, stood before Ugochugwu, who knelt humbly before them, his heart full of gratitude. One by one, the elders presented him with gifts. First, they granted him a vast expanse of fertile land, rich with the promise of abundant harvests. It was the finest land in all of Ezenwa, bordered by the now thriving river, where Ugochugwu could cultivate crops that would sustain him and his family for generations to come. Next, they presented him with livestock, cows, goats, and chickens, ensuring that he would have everything he needed to build a prosperous and secure life. But the greatest gift of all was yet to come. The elders had chosen to honor Ugochugwu with the hand of Adaora, a woman whose beauty, grace, and kindness were renowned throughout the village. Adaora was not only lovely in appearance, with her radiant smile and warm eyes, but she was also known for her gentle spirit and her unwavering compassion. She was a woman who had always treated others with kindness, even when they had little to offer in return. As Adaora stepped forward, the crowd fell silent, all eyes on her as she approached Ugochugwu. Her steps were measured, her gaze steady, and when she reached him, she looked into his eyes with a warmth that made his heart swell. Adaora had heard the stories of Ugochugwu's transformation, of the man he had become through his trials, and she was deeply moved by his courage and resilience. She saw in him not just a hero, but a man who had faced his darkest moments and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Ugochugwu, for his part, was overwhelmed by Adaora's presence. He had never imagined that such a woman would be offered to him, especially after all he had been through. Yet here she was, standing before him with an open heart, ready to share her life with him. For the first time in many years, Ugochugwu felt truly deserving of the blessings that were being bestowed upon him. With a voice that trembled with emotion, Adaora spoke, "Ugochugwu, I have seen the man you have become, and I am honored to stand by your side. Together, we will build a life of love, strength, and prosperity, and I will be your partner in all things." Tears welled up in Ugochugwu's eyes as he took Adaora's hands in his own. In that moment, he understood that this was not just a reward for his deeds, but a new beginning, a chance to build a life filled with love, purpose, and fulfillment. The village erupted in cheers as Ugochugwu and Adaora were joined together, their union a symbol of hope and renewal for all of Ezenwa. The river, once feared lost, now flowed freely through the village, bringing with it the promise of a bright future. And as Ugochugwu looked out over the faces of the people who had once doubted him, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had found his place in the world, not through the accolades of others, but through the journey of self-discovery and redemption that had led him back home. With Adaora by his side, Ugochugwu embarked on a new chapter in his life, one that was marked by growth, renewal, and a sense of purpose he had never known before. The fertile land gifted to him by the village elders became the foundation upon which he built his new life. Each day, as the sun rose over the horizon, Ugochugwu and Adaora worked the fields together, their hands laboring in the rich soil that now thrived under their care. The once barren land soon blossomed with abundant crops, their vibrant colors painting a picture of prosperity that stood in stark contrast to the hardships of Ugochugwu's past. The livestock that roamed the fields grew strong and healthy, their numbers multiplying as the seasons passed. Ugochugwu tended to them with the same diligence and care he had once applied to his studies, understanding now that his true worth was not measured by academic success or societal approval, but by the integrity of his actions and the love he poured into his work. Adaora, with her gentle wisdom and nurturing spirit, was his steadfast partner in all things. Together, they created a home that was not just a place of shelter, but a sanctuary of love, warmth, and shared dreams. As Ugochugwu's farm flourished, so too did the village of Ezenwa. The river, whose renewed flow had been the catalyst for Ugochugwu's transformation, continued to course through the village with a vitality that brought life to everything it touched. The villagers, who had once faced the prospect of drought and famine, now reaped the benefits of a bountiful harvest. The markets were filled with produce, the livestock were well fed, and the people, once gripped by fear and despair, now lived with a sense of security and hope that had not been felt in generations. Ugochugwu's story quickly spread beyond the borders of Ezenwa, becoming the stuff of legend. Elders would gather the children around the fire at night, recounting the tale of the young man who had fallen from grace, only to rise again as a hero. They spoke of his early years, when he had been the pride of the village, excelling in his studies and destined for greatness. They told of the crushing blow of his failure, and the spiral of despair that had led him to the brink of ruin. But most importantly, they spoke of his journey into the wilderness, the trials he faced, and the courage he showed in confronting his own demons. Ugochugwu himself never sought the title of hero. He lived his life with a quiet dignity, content to work the land and care for his family. But the villagers saw in him a symbol of hope, a living testament to the power of redemption. People would come to him for advice, seeking his wisdom on matters both great and small. He became a mentor to the young men of the village, teaching them not just the skills of farming and animal husbandry, but the importance of character, integrity, and perseverance. Adaora, too, became a beloved figure in the village. Her kindness and grace touched the lives of many, and she was often sought after for her counsel and support. Together, she and Ugochugwu created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy not of wealth or power, but of love, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from living a life of purpose. In the years that followed, Ugochugwu's farm became a place of gathering, where villagers would come to celebrate the harvest, share in each other's joys and sorrows, and listen to the stories that had shaped their community. And as they sat by the river that had once run dry, now flowing stronger than ever, they would speak of Ugochugwu, the man who had once been lost, but had found his way home. The story of Ugochugwu became a powerful reminder to the people of Ezenwa, and to all who heard it, that no one is beyond redemption. It was a story of resilience, of how even the most broken souls could find the strength to rise above their circumstances and reclaim their lives. It was a story of humility, of how true greatness is not found in pride or status, but in the willingness to learn from one's mistakes and to grow from them. And it was a story of courage, of how the darkest times can reveal the greatest heroes, not through grand gestures, but through quiet perseverance and unwavering faith. The drunkard who had once been the village's greatest disappointment had indeed become its greatest hope. His story was etched into the hearts of all who knew him, a reminder that no matter how far one may fall, the path to redemption is always within reach for those who have the courage to seek it. And so, Ugochugwu's name became synonymous with resilience and redemption, a beacon of light for all who faced their own struggles, showing them that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way forward.
Thanks for watching today's story. I believe you enjoyed every bit of it all. Now I want you to do me one favor, subscribe to this channel, like and turn on the notification bell if you have not done so that whenever I release my next video, you will be notified immediately. See you soon.